Sunday, May 5th, 2019, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. One of the main objectives of my channel is to inform the public, the general public around the world about the dangers of central banking, the dangers that central banking pose to the general public, to the prosperity of the general public. Everything the central bank does is for the advantage of the bankers. And why do I say that? Well, because central banks were created to be lenders of last resort for the banking system. So it's a special privilege for a business that should be like any other business. If you fail and in a business venture, you should fail. That's how free markets work. You have to learn from your mistakes. But the bankers never do learn from their mistakes. They keep making the mistakes. And we, the general public, keep paying for it. And today I want to talk about a couple of sources. One is an article from a website called wallstreetonparade.com. I read this article over the weekend. I just finished reading it. When I came back, I played golf this morning, and I came back and finished reading it. I had started reading it last night, and it's a great article. The other is a video on YouTube by John Titus, and I highly recommend his YouTube channel. He needs more subscribers. He's only got just under 8,000. His YouTube channel is Best Evidence. And the video I'm recommending, even though all his videos are great, is the one he made on March 28th this year, The 1 Trillion Devil in the Details. And how are these two sources related? Well, the article on Wall Street on Parade was written by Pam Martins and Russ Martins. It says Bernanke, Paulson, Geithner wrapped themselves in the heroic garb of firefighters to lobby for another Wall Street bailout. These guys are back at it, trying to change the dodd-frank legislation that was passed after the 2008 financial crisis, which basically doesn't allow the Fed and the Treasury to do what they did in 2008. These guys, they're trying to say that they didn't bail out Wall Street, that they actually saved America. But by watching John Titus's video, he talks about how basically the Main Street was not in trouble. Of course, housing market was in trouble. A lot of people lost their homes. But I would argue that a lot of people were over leveraged in their homes. They borrowed too much. But in general, John Titus goes through it quite clearly that TARP and all the bailouts were to save the Wall Street banks. And that's what it was about. And why did how did the Wall Street banks get so, how can I say, leveraged and so in trouble? Well, it's through the derivatives market. We had a quadrillion a quadrillion notional amount of derivatives. So that means that they had bets. Not only the banks, of course, the majority though were the banks with hedge funds, other investors, $1,000 trillion worth of notional amount. A lot of times the argument from the bankers is that the notional amount doesn't matter because the short and the long cancel each other out. So, if there's a loss of 1%, nothing happened. There's, for every winner, there's a loser. But what happened in 07 and 08 is that when another counterparty who's on the other side of the derivatives bets, like AIG Financial Products, when they go under, the whole house of cards comes down, and that 1,000 trillion or quadrillion notional amount becomes important. And nothing has changed. We still have a huge derivatives market. I personally used to work in the exchange-traded derivatives market, which is the futures and options exchange. Those are highly leveraged, but at least they're transparent and people know what's going on. The most dangerous type of derivative is the over-the-counter derivative. This is the kind of derivative where if you watch The Big Short, you probably saw this. The fund managers, I think it was the guy from California who wanted to make a bet in the housing. I forgot his name now, but he traveled to Wall Street, to New York, and he knocked on the door, Goldman Sachs and other people, and he asked these banks to basically write a derivative for him. So they sold him this derivative. So they were, and he made a bet. And Goldman and the other investment banks like Deutsche Bank, Morgan Stanley, they took the other side. And they were actually laughing at the guy. I highly recommend The Big Short. They were laughing at the guy, and and things turned around. And if it wasn't for the Fed and the hidden loans that the Fed made, not only to American investment banks, but also foreign investment banks. And this is what Wall Street on Parade article goes on about. I'll just read a little bit here. It says, could Bernanke, Paulson, and Geithner have possibly picked a more self-serving title for their latest revisionist history? Their secret 29 trillion bailout of the most insidiously corrupt industry in America? Their new book is titled Firefighting: The Financial Crisis and Its Lessons. And it goes on to say every municipal and volunteer firefighter in America should come together to file a class action lawsuit against the three for invoking an honorable profession in their dishonorable gambit to set Wall Street up for another obscene heads we win, tails we lose bailout. So this is very important. They're basically saying that they've been trying for the last year or so, going to making speeches to hedge funds, to think tanks, but they didn't succeed. They want to, excuse me, they want to tweak the dodd-frank legislation to allow basically the Fed and the Treasury to do the same thing they did again in '08 to bail out Wall Street at your expense, the taxpayer. And I think we need to stay very vigilant, not only in the US, but here in the UK as well, against this. These guys are very dangerous. And they come across, of course, like, they save the world, even though this article goes on to talk about how the Fed, the New York Fed under Geithner, who became Treasury Secretary under Obama eventually. He was New York Fed head during the crisis. How he met dozens of times with the major shareholders of Citigroup. Citigroup was allowed to use FDIC insurance to bail out its trading desk. FDIC insurance should be used to help depositors if there's a problem. And there's so much that went on that is so corrupt. And, we need to make sure that we let people know about this, because this is very important. So what else did it say here in this article? I won't go through the whole thing. I highly recommend you read it, though. So I'll look at the final section here, what it's saying, why this is important that people be aware of this, because we don't want to let this happen again, for the bankers to bail out again. They need to start taking responsibility for themselves. I mean, I used to work in the banking system. I worked actually for Citibank back in the 90s for their futures department. And then they sold out that department to ABN AMRO Bank. I worked for ABN AMRO. But when I left the City of London in 2012, I started my own business. And the business did not fail, but it just wasn't going well enough. And I decided to close the business down because I knew if I kept plowing my savings into it, it wasn't going to do very well. So I just decided to take the hit, but no one bailed me out, and no one should really be bailed out. It's the worst thing that can happen, in my opinion. People need to learn from their mistakes, and so does Wall Street. And that's why, as well, we need to basically end central banks because we don't want central bank reforms, because there's always the temptation, if there is a lender of last resort, that the banks are going to come, for running towards the central bank and the treasury to be saved. And it also creates moral hazard by having this backstop. We don't, and I think that's the most important thing of why I always call for ending central banks and ending the Fed especially. By the way, a lot of you know I have a little maneco 64 Teespring store, and I sell t-shirts, mugs, Billy mugs, and the Fed mugs. So I highly recommend you'd help the channel so I can keep giving this message that needs to be out there, that central banks basically corrupt the banking system. They actually don't help the banking system. Look at ever since the Fed was created, how the crises are getting bigger. It doesn't get better. So why stay with a central bank? As Ron Paul said, let's end the Fed. So yeah, there's a link below in the description of where you can get the maneco 64 merchandise. It's a bit of fun, and it helps the channel with a little bit of profit. Nothing wrong with profit either, as long as it's not subsidized by the government. So this is what this article says here towards the end. And this is what we need to not fall into the trap. As part of this new media blitz, the three, well, that's Bernanke, Hank Paulson, and Tim Geithner, the three appeared on CNN this past Sunday. Communist news network, the fake news. Paulson had this to say, why Americans remain so angry at Wall Street. And I quote Paulson, "And I think the biggest reason they're angry is in America, if we work hard and we succeed, people expect there to be rewards. And when you fail, they expect you to fail, and they don't expect the government to come in and rescue." That's right, Mr. Paulson. And that includes your buddies at on Wall Street, at Goldman Sachs, at JP Morgan, at AIG, all those places. But then he goes on to say, and we weren't trying to rescue Wall Street. You had to deal with this. There's so much concentration to deal with the problem. We had to go to the source. And what we did is we put a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. But because if we hadn't done that, if we hadn't stopped the collapse, many, many Americans would have been hurt. Of course, and a lot of Americans were hurt. But the people that should have been hurt the most were the bankers. And they were actually made whole, and they've been making more and more money ever since. And I highly recommend the video by John Titus, Best Evidence, the 1 trillion devil in the details. And this is where he exposes Paulson, Bernanke, and Geithner's basically as liars, and he's got proof for it. So he's continued to lie, Hank Paulson, because Main Street wasn't as in bad shape as they make out, as Bernanke made out. It was more Wall Street that was going to implode. But of course, a lot of people would have been hurt. But the people that would have been hurt the most were the people at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, all the big investment banks, not only in the US, but in the UK and Europe. It would have been the blank fines and the Gary Cohns who would have been hurt of the world. So This is what they say here in this article at the end. This is revisionist history at its finest. Millions of Americans were hurt. More than 8.7 million Americans lost their jobs between 2006 and 2014. Close to 10 million American homes were lost to foreclosure. The financial crisis produced the longest recession in the post-World War II era. 2.5 million businesses closed down. Income inequality grew at the highest rate since the Great Depression. As of 2017, the top 0.1% of Americans are taking in 188 times the income of the bottom 90% of America. This is Wall Street's institutionalized wealth transfer system that Bernanke, Paulson, and Geithner want to scrub from their resumes and history books by offering an alternative reality while simultaneously continuing to serve the interests of Wall Street. The media should be ashamed of themselves for participating in this ruse. And they say in the article, we specifically pointing at you, NPR. So there you go. People need to wake up to these guys. Unfortunately, the big purveyor of fake news, CNN, is giving these guys a platform. I know I don't reach the amount of people CNN reaches, but at least I'm trying my best here. So please share this video far and wide if you can to wake people up, not to allow this to happen again for Wall Street, City of London, and the major international banks to be bailed out again. They haven't reformed. If anything, they're probably, they haven't reformed. They're still playing the derivatives game, and they want, they want to go back to how it was before. So if things get bad and another crisis hits, we're going to be paying for them again, right? So if you enjoyed the video, make sure you give me a thumbs up, share it far and wide, as I said earlier. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. You can also follow me on Twitter, Steemit, and on DTube. I wish you all a great rest of the weekend. Take care. Bye.